The house did not creak, it held its breath. Dust motes drifted in the slants of feeble light that cut through the gaps in the boarded-up windows, not floating, but suspended, as if the very air was too heavy to move. He moved through the gloom, a silent attendant in a shrine to a ghost who was still breathing. The air was thick with the cloying sweetness of decay and old perfume, a scent that clung to the back of the throat. He stood at the sink, washing a single porcelain cup, the repetitive motion of fragile anchor. From the parlor, the soft, maddening scratch of the phonograph needle in the run-out groove began its loop. It was her signal. His hands stilled in the tepid water, his own breath catching in his chest. He dried his hands meticulously on a threadbare towel, each second a reprieve, each movement a deliberate act of stalling the inevitable. When he entered, she was arranged on the settee like a forgotten doll, her hair carefully combed, draped in the faded lace of a wedding gown that had yellowed with time and tragedy. Her eyes, once warm, were now pale, clouded pools reflecting a reality only she could see. "You've kept me waiting," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. A smile touched her lips, but it was a terrible, empty thing. "Come, sit with me. The night is so long." He forced his legs to move, each step a monumental effort against a tide of revulsion. He lowered himself onto the cushion beside her, the springs groaning a low protest. Her hand, cold and dry as bone, found his and laced their fingers together in a mockery of intimacy. "Tell me about your day, my love," she murmured, leaning her head against his shoulder. Her scent enveloped him, sickness and roses. His throat closed. He had to force the words out, shaping them into a voice that was not his own, a gentle, patronizing tone he had learned to mimic from old photographs and fractured memories. "It was quiet, my dear. I thought only of you." She sighed, a sound of contentment that made his skin crawl. "That's how it should be." Her fingers tightened on his. "This is how it should always be. Just us. You promised. Forever." In the tarnished silver of a picture frame across the room, he caught their dim reflection, a young man, rigid with dread, holding the crumbling woman who had given him life, yet who now looked at him with the possessive, needy eyes of a bride. The son was gone, buried alive in this suffocating house. All that remained was the husband, trapped in a vow he never made, forced to love a ghost who refused to die. The first ceremony is not merely an event, it is the foundational trauma, the violent rupture that cleaves the protagonist's life into a definitive before and after. It is the moment the abstract, creeping horror solidifies into an inescapable and active reality. In the story's structure, this turning point serves as the brutal initiation, the point of no return where the son's agency is systematically dismantled and the grotesque new world order is formally established. Before this night, the situation would have been one of unsettling peculiarity and mounting dread. The mother's mental state would have been deteriorating, her confusion deepening, perhaps with her beginning to mistake her son for her late husband in fleeting moments, a misidentification that was initially jarring but could perhaps be dismissed or corrected. The protagonist likely existed in a state of anxious hope, believing he could nurse her back to sanity, that this was a temporary fog. The first ceremony shatters that hope utterly. It is the moment the delusion ceases to be a passive error and becomes an active script that he is forced to participate in. The power of this turning point lies in its ritualistic, staged quality. It is unlikely to be a moment of violent physical force, but rather one of profound psychological coercion, making it far more chilling. The mother, perhaps dressed in a relic from her past like a wedding gown or negligee, would enact a series of expected behaviors, a certain way of speaking, a specific term of endearment, an expectation of physical proximity. She is not a monster in this moment, but a tragically lost soul reinforcing a scene from her broken memory. The horror for the son is that to contradict her, to break the scene, would risk shattering her completely, causing a hysterical meltdown or a total withdrawal that he, as her sole caretaker, feels incapable of handling. His compliance, therefore, is born from a terrible, trapped calculation. He is faced with an impossible choice: uphold his own sanity and identity by rejecting her delusion, or sacrifice them to maintain her fragile peace. By choosing the latter, he becomes an actor in his own nightmare. The ceremony might involve sitting with her for a prescribed amount of time, holding her hand in a specific way, repeating certain phrases of reassurance that a husband would give a wife. It is a performance where every word feels like a betrayal of himself and of her true self. The physical touch, which should be one of familial comfort, becomes a violation. The intimate space of a bedroom or parlor transforms into a stage for a profane play. The aftermath is where his spirit is truly broken. When the ceremony concludes, perhaps when she falls asleep or dismisses him, he is left alone with the aftermath of his own complicity. The feeling of his own skin crawls, he may scrub his hands raw, trying to remove the ghost of her touch. The house, once a place of burden, is now a prison whose rules have been horrifically defined. He realizes that this is not a one-time event. It is the new template for his existence. The son he was is now a ghost, and the husband he was forced to become is his new, wretched identity. This first night establishes the core tension of the story, the relentless psychological erosion of a person who is being forced, out of a twisted sense of duty and fear, to become the central figure in another's devastating delusion. The discovery of the journal serves as the story's pivotal expositional and emotional turning point, shifting the narrative from a straightforward tale of horror to a complex tragedy. Up until this moment, the protagonist's reality is defined by a senseless, cruel insanity imposed upon him. The mother's demands are perceived as random manifestations of a broken mind, a monstrous and selfish delusion that he is forced to endure. His suffering is compounded by its apparent meaninglessness. The journal shatters this perception, replacing monstrous absurdity with a devastating and heartbreaking logic, which, in its own way, is far more terrible to bear. The discovery itself must be stumbled upon, a moment of fateful chance that feels less like luck and more like a trap snapping shut. Perhaps a loose floorboard gives way under his weight during a frantic attempt to find some forgotten medicine, or a book falls from a high shelf, dislodging a hidden box he was never meant to find. The act of finding it is clandestine, a violation of her privacy that is dwarfed by the violation he himself endures daily. The journal's physical state is important, the binding is cracked, the pages are brittle and yellowed, and the ink, perhaps once a vibrant blue or black, has faded to the color of old blood or a bruise. It is an artifact, a relic from the time before the gloom settled permanently in the house. Reading it is not a passive act, it is a descent. The initial entries might paint a picture of the woman she once was, vibrant, hopeful, deeply in love. This normalcy makes the subsequent unraveling all the more painful to witness. The protagonist sees the first cracks appear, perhaps after a profound loss, the death of her husband, a miscarriage, a betrayal the son never knew about. The entries become more disjointed, the handwriting deteriorating from elegant script to a frantic, spidery scrawl. The reader, alongside the protagonist, witnesses the grammar of her grief as it corrupts her reality. The critical revelation is the precise moment her delusion crystallizes. It is not a random confusion. The journal would detail her profound, pathological inability to accept the finality of her loss. She might write of hearing his footsteps in the hall, of setting a place for him at the table, of believing he never truly left. Then, the most devastating entry of all, the one where she notes how her son is beginning to resemble his father. Not just in looks, but in his mannerisms, the cadence of his voice, the way he carries himself. This observation, which might once have been a source of maternal pride, curdles in her fractured mind into a supernatural sign, a miracle. She begins to rationalize the impossible, that a part of her lost love has returned through the son. The line between father and son blurs not out of malice, but out of a desperate, grieving love that has curdled into madness. This discovery fundamentally alters the protagonist's prison. The walls are no longer made of plain, senseless stone, they are now inscribed with the tragic history of his own damnation. He can no longer see his mother as a mere monster. He is forced to see her as a victim of her own unbearable grief, and he is now an unwilling actor in her internal, haunted play. His role is not random, it is a specific, written part in a tragedy she authored. This knowledge strips him of the righteous anger that may have been sustaining him. How can he rage against a ghost, or against a sadness so profound it broke the world? His compliance is now haunted by a terrible, tragic understanding, making his continued participation not just an act of captivity, but one of macabre pity, binding him to her delusion with chains of empathy as well as fear. The shattered reflection is the moment of horrifying visual confirmation, a psychological point of no return where the protagonist's internal disintegration is mirrored in the external world. It is the violent collapse of the last bastion of his identity, his own self-image. Until this point, he could maintain a fragile, internal duality, the external husband he is forced to perform, and the internal son who remains, screaming in silence. This moment shatters that duality, proving that the performance is no longer just an act, it is becoming his new, horrifying reality. This turning point hinges on the potent symbolism of the mirror. A reflection is a fundamental anchor of identity, it confirms our separate existence and our physical self. In the distorted reality of the house, this anchor is ripped away. The moment must occur organically, in the midst of their grotesque pantomime. He might be guiding her, with a hand on the small of her back, to her seat at the dinner table. Or he might be adjusting the shawl around her shoulders, performing a husband's intimate, caring duty. His movements are practiced, almost automatic, a testament to how deeply the role has been ingrained. It is then that he catches sight of them in a mirror, perhaps the grand, tarnished one above the mantelpiece, or the dark, antique glass of a hallway console. He does not see a mother and her son. The image that greets him is a perversion of domesticity, a young man and an older woman, locked in a pose of intimate familiarity. The dim light, the setting, and the very composition of the reflection conspire to obliterate their true relationship. In that frozen, silvered tableau, he does not see his own face contorted in distress. He sees the face of a resigned husband, tending to his ailing wife. He sees the ghost of his father in his own posture, his own weary expression. This is not a moment of external shock, but of internal, soul-shattering recognition. The reflection does not lie, it reveals a deeper, more terrible truth. It shows him what he has become. The performance has etched itself onto his very being, reshaping his body language and his countenance to fit the role. The self he clings to, the son, is absent from the glass. In his place is the compliant husband, a seamless part of the horrific tableau. The impact is visceral. It is a silent, internal scream. The ground of his identity falls away, leaving him in a freefall of existential terror. He may physically recoil, breaking the pose, but the damage is done. The image is now burned onto his retina, an inescapable truth he can never unsee. Every time he closes his eyes, it will be there. From this moment forward, the house is filled not just with his mother's delusion, but with living, breathing proof of its success. He can no longer trust his own reflection. He has become a stranger to himself, a ghost haunting the life he was supposed to live. The reflection shatters the last illusion of separation, forcing him to confront the horrifying fact that he is no longer just playing a part, he is being consumed by it, and the outline of the son he was is fading fast, replaced by the permanent silhouette of the husband he was forced to become. The outside world's glimpse is a critical turning point that serves as a brutal injection of reality, transforming the story's central horror from a private, internalized nightmare into a peril with external consequences. Up until this moment, the grotesque dynamic exists in a sealed, pressurized environment, a shared secret that, however vile, is contained within the walls of the house. This event shatters that containment, introducing the terrifying risk of exposure and, with it, a new, potent form of paranoia that forever alters the protagonist's relationship with both his prison and his jailer. The intrusion must be minor, accidental, and mundane, a delivery person with a parcel requiring a signature, a meter reader gaining entry through an unlocked side door, or a well-meaning neighbor returning a stray item. The very ordinariness of this intrusion creates a stark, jarring contrast with the abnormal reality inside the house. The visitor represents the world of rules, social norms, and judgment, a world the protagonist has been forcibly removed from but whose laws he still fears. The horror of the moment is not in what the outsider sees, but in what they might see. It is a crisis of perception. The scene unfolds with a frantic, silent panic. The doorbell's chime is not a sound but a seismic shock to the system. The protagonist's reaction is one of pure, animalistic terror. He must now perform two simultaneous, conflicting roles with frantic speed, the devoted husband, for his mother to prevent her from spiraling into a public display of her delusion, and the normal son, for the outsider to deflect any suspicion. He might try to usher his mother into another room with a forced, calm whisper, only for her to resist, perhaps calling out to him with a wifely endearment in the stranger's hearing. He may have to physically position himself to block a view, to invent a hasty lie about her illness, to explain her strange attire or her possessive clinging. The true turning point occurs in the collaborative, unspoken conspiracy that this near miss creates between him and his mother. In the moments of frantic cover-up, they are, for the first time, not perpetrator and victim, but co-conspirators. She may, in a flicker of lucidity or simply through a shared instinct for self-preservation, understand the need to hide the true nature of their relationship from the outside world. This shared secret is more poisonous than the private one. It validates the delusion by giving it an enemy, the world outside, and solidifies their unnatural bond. After the outsider leaves, with a polite, oblivious nod, the silence that descends is different. It is thick with a new, shared understanding. They are not just trapped together, they are hiding together. This event fundamentally seals his fate. It proves that the outside world is not a potential source of rescue, but a threat. To be discovered would mean not freedom, but unimaginable shame, legal intervention, and the total destruction of what little stability remains. He realizes that he must now actively protect the very nightmare that enslaves him. The house's walls become not just a physical barrier, but a fortress against a world that must never know the truth. His imprisonment is now voluntary as well as forced. He becomes a warden of his own cell, perpetually vigilant, seeing a potential threat in every passing car and every shadow on the porch, forever haunted by the fear of a second, more discerning glimpse. The final assimilation is the story's devastating, quiet climax. It is not marked by a dramatic event or an external shock, but by a profound internal silence, the death of the protagonist's internal resistance and the complete erasure of the self he once was. This is the point where the performance ceases to be a performance and becomes his new, unthinking reality. The husband is no longer a role he plays, it is who he has become. The horror here is not one of active terror, but of passive, chilling acceptance, signaling the ultimate victory of the delusion and the total consumption of the sun. This moment is the culmination of all the previous turning points. The forced ceremonies broke his spirit, the journal provided a tragic rationale that disarmed his anger, the shattered reflection robbed him of his self-image, and the outside world's glimpse eliminated any hope of escape. What remains is a psychological vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. The persona of the husband rushes in to fill the void left by the departed son. This shift is terrifying precisely because of its subtlety. There is no fanfare, no final struggle. It happens in a mundane, everyday moment, underscoring that the transformation is now complete and utterly mundane to him. The trigger is a minor, recurring situation he has faced countless times before. His mother might call for him from another room, using that name, his father's name. In the past, this would have sent a jolt of revulsion through him, a silent, internal scream of, "I am not him." He would have had to consciously force his body to respond, every step weighted with dread. But now, when the call comes, there is no jolt. There is no internal correction. He simply responds. He might even answer verbally, without a moment's hesitation or a pang of discomfort. The wrong name no longer feels wrong because the person it was meant for is gone. Another manifestation could be an instinctive, unprompted action. He might, without conscious thought, reach out and adjust the wedding band on her finger, a band she insists symbolizes their union, smoothing it into place with a touch that is no longer performative but possessive. Or he might find himself speaking to her in the specific, patronizing tone of voice his father used in old home movies, a vocal pattern he now owns without remembering he learned it. The most chilling part is the lack of internal monologue. The story's internal voice of the son, the one that narrated his disgust, his fear, his desperation, falls silent. There is no one left to protest. This is the true end of the story, a fate worse than any physical death. It is the psychological equivalent of a body succumbing to hypothermia, where the cold no longer feels cold because the nerves responsible for registering the pain have frozen and died. The protagonist is now fully assimilated into the ecosystem of the delusion. He moves through the rituals of his false life with the quiet efficiency of a ghost, no longer a prisoner raging against his chains, but a seamless part of the prison itself. The house is finally at peace, not because the horror has ended, but because the last person who recognized it as horror is no longer there. The victory of the madness is total.